Hey there, hi there, ho there, welcome back once again, to another exciting episode of Disney
Hmm.
Compendium. Uh, we're back. We're back to Song of the South. I, as always, am your host, JJ. And over there, on the other end of these tin cans with string, is not my good friend Nick. It's a different good friend, longtime friend. How about you introduce yourself?
Sure, I am. I think I'm still Dali
I
Demovsky.
hope so. I hope
I
so, or
hope
else I
so.
invited the wrong person.
The wrong Dolly. It's funny saying my name. I never say my name. I'm always introducing everybody else, but I'm like, I'm Dolly Demovsky. Oh, I have to figure out a better way to say it. But no, I'm Dolly Demovsky, and JJ is my friend.
Yeah, you're on the other side of the hosting duties this
Yeah,
time,
it's
where you,
crazy now. I gotta stay awake.
guess, yeah, yeah. Now you're the yeah. Now I'm the one with the control of the stream here. But yeah, no, we've known each other for a very long time.
Yep.
Uh, Video games
Yes.
as a thing. So I'm on Side Questing's podcast kind of all the time now. Side Questing is the website, the video game website that you run and operate.
Mhm.
So
I
uh,
guess. Yeah.
yeah, it certainly operates. I don't know if
It
it's
certainly
necessarily.
operates. So I don't know if it's well yet, but it's somehow still moving, but I don't know how. It's like I guess you can compare it to like pushing a bike down a hill. Even if the bike doesn't have tires
Yeah,
anymore, it'll still
it's
move.
still
Like it'll
it's
like
still going.
it's still going
It
somehow.
doesn't need a
Yeah.
rider. It doesn't need any
Nope.
things. It's just it's
No.
momentum has made it unstoppable at this point.
Yes. Yes.
But no, it's great. It's fun. We get a lot of good
Yeah.
have a lot of good
Definitely.
conversations every week on the podcast for sure. And there's some really fun content to read on there. So
Definitely. But we don't get
yeah.
into movies.
No, we don't. We don't.
No, not really.
As hard as I try. Uh,
Yeah.
but no, I thought uh, by the time we're recording this, I haven't put the episode out yet, so you haven't even heard it yet.
Mm-mm.
So you're also going in blind on this one. But I
Going
thought,
in green.
yeah, I thought it would be fun to because you'd never seen this before, correct?
No, you gave me the homework and you said
Yeah,
you need to watch Song of the South.
yeah.
And I had to
So
find the full song. Thankfully, internetarchive.org
yes,
has it hosted on there. So I just
yes,
boop watched it there.
yes, and a really high quality
Yeah,
cut
it
of it
is.
too. So like somebody went through the painstaking steps of remastering it, even, which
Right.
is because that's it's never been released on home video here in the
Mm-mm.
states. So other countries it has, but yeah, never here. So I thought it'd be fun to talk to somebody who basically all you know about this movie is that it's Disney's dirty little secret.
Oh, gosh. Is it ever?
It's yeah, it's the Voldemort of Disney movies. It's the one
He
that shall
should not
not
be
be named.
named. Yeah.
Yet somehow still incredibly important for Disney, and they've milked it for all they could up until very recently. And that's why I thought it'd be fun to do it now, since it's in the news, since they're its sort of last
Hmm.
remnants is getting pulled out of the theme parks, and that's kind of going to be it for it, probably
Yeah.
forever at this point. So yeah, I thought I'm going to strong arm somebody who has never seen this before to watch it, and we're going to talk about it because I think it's one of those movies that's tricky to like
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
talk to somebody about because it has that history of racism.
Hmm.
And how do you bring that up as a white guy first
Right.
and
No,
foremost?
yeah. And that
Yeah,
was, it's fun, interesting because um, I was always hesitant I'd heard about this film,
yeah,
but I'd always been hesitant to watch it only from the standpoint of I'm a white dude.
yeah.
And I don't
Do
know
you
how I should feel if I watch it. But I guess
yeah,
with any piece of art, I guess if you want to call this art, any piece of art, you kind of you go in with yourself and then you come out maybe with maybe better, maybe understanding about your feelings towards something a little bit better.
yeah.
You leave art trying to feel something, and I did feel something leaving this.
You certainly do. You certainly
You
do leaving this.
certainly do.
Um, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of the history leading up to this movie's
Please.
existence. So this movie came out in '46, which that's we're just after World War II. The '40s were not a great time for the studio. In 41, there was a animator strike, which really hurt a lot of Walt's feelings towards the production of animation. And in during World War II, the studio was completely taken over by the military because it was kind of in the vicinity of, I think, Lockheed in California. So it was used as sort of like a station to protect like the military in a way. So the military was based out of the Air Force. The military was based out of the studio for a little bit. So during that time frame, the only money really the studio was making propaganda movies. So they really weren't pulling in anything.
Mickey buys war bonds.
Yeah, I mean, and there was that.
Basically, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there was definitely that. There was a lot of, xenophobic films, like, and all sorts of, like, one of the most famous ones is Donald Duck in Nutsy Land, which is, you've seen the pictures of it, and it's like Donald Duck sitting at his table reading Mein Kampf, because he has a nightmare where he wakes up in, like, Nazi Germany, and he's like indoctrinated into the whole scenario, and that's that. And there was a hit song that came out of Disney called Der Fuhrer's Face.
Der Fuhrer's Face, yeah.
Yes, that was originally the song came out. I think it was Spike Jones. The song came out before the cartoon came out, so it was already hit by the time the cartoon came out. So, I mean, that was what Disney was doing in the '40s. And the only money they really made was they did some re-releases of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Pinocchio in the mid-40s.
Some remasters, you might call it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The original remasters.
Yes, the original remasters. So yeah, that was really where their money came from. They did a couple of other films, Saludos Amigos and the Three Caballeros, which were also sort of government-funded films to talk about, South America and things, and get them on our side and get people to understand some other like countries, because this is still the '40s. With these, all you are watching are like newsreels, and that's how you learn about any culture, other than like maybe if your family's from somewhere. So after it's all said and done, they have no money. They're really just making package features. So Disney needs to make good on their contracts with RKO and also start making films that come out. So that's where you get this. This is a movie. This is a movie that they first started. Walt first started sort of conceiving in the late '30s because, like, his family liked the Joel Chandler Harris Uncle Remus storybooks. And so he ends up paying $10,000 to acquire the rights of the movie, and so that's sort of the brief history of Song of the South.
It's funny because I don't want to say it's funny, but I was actually doing the reading of the Wikipedia, which is the home of all legit information out there.
Yeah.
And I didn't know going into this. It's funny because, well, I don't want to say it's funny. The way I kind of watched the film, I'll say that aloud. I'll say it's funny because I'm dumb. But the way I watched this film was, as I'd watch parts of it, I'd say, I wonder what that's from. And then I would hop on like Wikipedia or some other source out there and try to find out the history. Sorry, I just spilled coffee, which is a very typical Dali thing to do. That's why I'm not on other podcasts. No, but I would hop on looking for like some news and information about, or history about something. And, I didn't know anything about Uncle Remus. I thought, that's kind of interesting, Uncle Remus. I wonder what did Disney just create now? And I did a little bit of research. I'm like, oh crap, that was like a real character, real thing was Uncle Remus. And then Briar Rabbit, the same thing. I thought that was something that Disney. Nope. And then it was all of those that I thought, where did all these come from? And it was that Joel Chandler Harris.
Yeah, it's
Um, yeah.
the book itself sort of shows you where the problems are going to lie with this movie in general, because Joel Chandler Harris is very much a white man, uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
writing
Yep.
basically adopting the culture, because these were all sort of based on actual sort of like stories like that Black Americans and slaves would tell during its during their time in the country, in they're not so great days for them, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So of course, yeah, here comes this white guy that comes along and sort of takes these stories and sort of spins them into his own book and makes money off of that. So that's
Mm.
good. That's putting you
That sounds legit. Yeah.
yeah, that's putting you into the sort of headspace of this movie. So yeah, it's like, I guess what it's like, first impressions of the movie is that it's beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
well shot. It looks great. The animation is all very very good, but it all sort of and has
I was
yeah
on that same point. I was actually surprised at how well a lot of the cinematography was in this. Just because I think of films in like the late 30s and early 40s as having a very specific
yeah
sort of style, but
mm-hmm.
this because it felt like because they were trying to get some of that animation style into the live action with just some of the shots they were doing and some
Yep.
of the things they were taking, it had a really distinct look and feel to it, to the point where I could definitely see the influence of some of the visual styles they did here later on in Disney's,
Yeah.
repertoire, I guess,
Oh,
with the
you
mix of
definitely
live action and animation.
yeah. So Disney, kind of got his start in like filmmaking and like in the cartoon world by doing, like, we're talking early 20s, was doing live action animation hybrids.
Hmm.
So it's funny they just kind of keep going back to that well. It's sort of like
Hmm.
it's always something big for them, because you had the Alice shorts from the early 20s, you have this in the 40s. Not too long after this, about 20 years later, you have Mary Poppins, which
Hmm.
does a lot of that same stuff. And in the 80s, the studio goes back and has a huge hit with Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
the live action animation hybrid is really sort of, it's a trademark of the studio. It's like ingrained in its history, and it's always very important to the studio. So
It,
it's
it's It
yeah
really, I had rewatched Pete's Dragon, the original Pete's
yeah
Dragon, a little while back,
yeah
and I thought, wow, after watching this film, I thought I really see some of those designer threads, I guess, that they pulled, that they continue to pull within
yeah
within Disney, because other studios have done a mix of live action
yeah yeah
and and animation, but it always comes off as a little bit stiffer
mm-hmm.
and kind of set, I guess posed, I guess, as maybe as the right way to say it, a little more static. But the way Disney does it, especially in this film, is there's a full kind of 360 feel. Their
Mm-hmm.
characters are always interacting with the animated side of things, and
yeah
stuff moves around the full screen, which is
yeah
really kind of interesting, because you'll have, they talk to the bluebird on one side of his shoulder
mm-hmm.
at one end of the screen, and then he looks and the thing flies behind him and lands on it. It's just kind of a really neat, making your eye move all over the place type of
Yeah,
feel.
they do a real good job at using the space for things that kind of don't exist.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly.
and like I said, it's 1946, so this movie was filmed in like 40 45.
Hmm.
And there's one thing, it's live action is cheaper than animation at around this time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was the main reason of having this be mostly live action with some animation, because it's the studio needed to save as much money as they
Hmm.
possibly could, and we're a decade away from the theme park opening. The studio's never really money solvent. Um, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was a huge hit. That was their first one, and yeah, huge movie, actually made them money. But all of the money ends up going back every time they make a dollar. It goes back into the next movies. So they're never like flush with cash. Nobody's really getting rich off of it.
Right, right.
Like
Yeah.
Walt's really the only one making any sort of real money, and even he's putting his own personal money into a lot of movie stuff.
Kept reinvesting that Disney
Yeah,
money right back into the next film.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So yeah, it's not until the 50s where it's like they're finally like starting to get their footing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's only around for about a decade later after all that's said and done. So now there's nothing that could happen that could shut this studio down. There's too many fingers and too many
Yeah,
pies. Or
the
yeah,
studio would shut everything else down first.
yeah. No, the last man standing is going to be Mickey Mouse at this point.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah.
Mickey
So
Mouse AI.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure there will be an AI running the theme parks.
There might already be, for all we know. There might already be.
They've been closed for the better part
Yeah, yeah.
of the year, so who knows what they've installed in that time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, cheap, and but just they Walt has an eye for that kind of stuff, and he was involved in this. Like most of the live action stuff, he was getting more involved in and getting more hands off with the animation. Because, like I said, Walt Walt really took it hard when his animators striked against him.
Mm.
Obviously, the animators were in the right, but Walt
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
lifelong Republican, and he blamed the communists for trying to take down his studio. He was part of the Red Scare. He testified to the Supreme Court kind of stuff. That kind or to the House. So yeah, so like
He would be perfect in today's climate, that's for sure.
yeah, yeah,
He'd be at home. Yeah.
yeah. So when they go back to the ending of this movie,
Mm-hmm.
there's the scene talking about sort of the cinematography, just one of those brilliant sort of things that they do. This one of the final scene when he's about to sing and is in the cartoon world and he starts to sing Zippity Doo Dah, and it's that really close up of his face, and then it pulls out and the sun comes out and everything.
Oh yeah,
They
yeah.
framed it wrong, so you would see the lighting rig in the shot. So what they had to do was basically put like a sheet up, and zoom in close and pull out
Oh,
and turn the
interesting.
lights on, so it turns into this lighting effect. So it looks like
Huh.
the sun's rising up while he starts to sing. So it's like they screwed up, but there was absolutely
Figure out a
zero.
way to fix it.
Yeah, there was absolutely zero time to do anything.
Hmm.
And so they improvised, and it actually makes for one of the more striking scenes in the movie.
Sure, sure.
The music in this movie is fantastic from start to finish.
It's the I did not know Zippity Doo Dah came from
Yes,
this.
Tuna.
Did not know that. I mean, it again. I don't want to say that like it tarnishes or taints the song at all, but
Yeah.
the legacy of the song. But it really, I didn't know it came from this, and I looking back now, I didn't know the full lyrics until I heard Uncle Remus and the characters
Yeah.
singing and whistling the tune. I thought, that was completely different than any lyrics that I would have remembered.
Yeah.
Changed over the 80s and 90s growing up as a kid.
What was the It's also kind of a ripoff of, speaking of a song that has sort of become problematic recently, because it's sort of intended to be a ripoff of like Turkey in the Straw.
Mm-hmm.
Because the version of it that sort of is the problematic one, that's the reason why they're taking it from uh, Ice Cream Trucks, is like what Zippity Doo Dah is sort of pulling at. It's trying to be that song. So it's like history hasn't been kind to Zippity Doo Dah, unfortunately, and it's a catchy as hell song.
It
And
really is.
I remember some places used to use like Zippity Doo Dah as their happy birthday song.
Yeah.
Instead
Oh my
of,
gosh.
because that was when Happy Birthday was still tied up in its like licensing issues.
Weirdly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
somehow that song was tied up. Like that's finally public domain, but yeah, at the time it was just like, oh, so we got to figure out something else. And so it's like, you would think Zippity Doo Dah, of anything, would also have some sort of
Would have
weird
more, right.
yeah, but yeah. So yeah, the music's all really good, but it's also just as problematic as everything else. And I guess you can't really get to talk about this movie without to really get into the elephant in the room of race relations with this movie. I don't know how what era would you say this movie took place in?
Again,
If
it
you had to
wasn't.
guess.
So I spoiled myself by reading up on when it's supposed to take place.
Yeah.
But totally not when I thought it was going to take place. Obviously, you have that weird. There are some things that are like too modern for that era that they throw in there. There are things that are like, kind of out of place. I had it, during pre-Civil War kind of plantation life, and it's supposed to be during the reparations. And
it's the Reconstruction era of
the Reconstruction
the
era. I'm sorry, Reconstruction
yeah.
era. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And so
there is no point in the movie that really makes it clear that it's not
nope.
at least during the Civil War.
Exactly. Right. Because you hear the scene opens with them on the family on in a carriage going to the aunt's house or whoever's house it was.
The plantation.
The plantation, basically.
Yeah.
And the dad being he's a journo, which he's hated. In modern times, people hate journalists, which is kind of a funny thing. But he's he writes for the newspaper and for the paper, and people get angry at some of the stuff that he writes or whatever the line was that the little boy said.
On the last episode, we were trying to figure out what exactly the dad's deal was, because they never really come out and say, like, he's dropping the family off and going back to Atlanta to deal with newspaper stuff. And it's like, this is like, if this were during the Civil War, that would make more sense than sort of Reconstruction, unless he works for a paper with like a pro Confederacy slant.
I don't know. It's kind of dark in a weird way. It's this
the live action, like especially the live action segments of this movie is nothing but chaos.
A complete yes. Well, the part where they're he drops the family off, and the kid goes off into the house or something, or goes off to play, and the wife turns to him and she says, "Are you going to tell him?" And I'm thinking, "Oh, what is he going to tell him? What is this family's like? What is this family's other dark secret? This other horrible secret that they have is the dad. Are they separating? Are they divorcing?" Yeah. And the secret was he had to go back to work. I'm like, well, that's kind of anticlimactic because I don't tell my family, hey, the big news, guys. I gotta go back to the office.
We think that maybe in an earlier script of this, it might have been during Civil War, like the Uncle Remus books. Like the character of Uncle Remus was a slave, and like we think like, was he going off to fight in the war, and that's why he couldn't do anything? Like, he was going to fight for the Confederacy or something, because they are in the South. It is on a plantation. Yeah. This is the antebellum, time frame of things. Like, but yeah, it's just, no, he has to go back to work, and they make a big deal out of it, but never explain why it's a big deal.
Exactly.
It's hard to tell if it's just some sort of, I'm so far removed from that. Like, maybe in the 40s, people would have understood like why it was a big deal for him to be going back to work during the Civil War, because people would have still like, oh, my grandfather was was in the Civil War, so when he was that guy. But no, it kind of, and he just shows back up at the end with no to do about it. No, like, I'm back from the paper wars. It's no, he's just
the
back.
Paper Wars.
Yeah, he just shows back up. So,
yeah, deadbeat dad.
Yeah, kind of. I don't like. None of the kids in this movie act great, and that's sort of a problem that a lot of movies have, especially from this time frame. Because I think it's because they were all trained by stage actors. So they all act because there is no. By this point, movies are they're not that old. I mean, like. Talking in films is only like 20 years old by this point. So everyone before that was like silent film, and silent film all took their cues from stage acting. And so there's a lot of like over expressing and gesticulations and stuff.
I was going to say the same thing. And what scene kind of draws me most to that point is the frog scene.
Yes.
Where the little boy is like trying to capture the frog. I forget his name, but he's, he like grabs the frog, and then it jumps out, and he like does a little like hand gesture, and then he puts it on his head, and it's just like this. Back then in the 40s, this was wouldn't be surprised if this was the norm, just because of like you're saying, it was the stage had gone on to that.
These kids are being trained by people that were trained being stage actors. There is no precedent. There is no going to you know, a you know, Academy of Fine Arts or anything. There is no learning
Hmm.
to be a television actor or a movie actor at this time. I mean, look, if you, I mean, because the kids all act like they're all out of the Little Rascals, you know, our
Yeah, it
gang.
really does feel like that. Yeah, yeah, you're right.
And it's sort of it's always noticeable in these movies, and they use the boy in this movie returns time and time again in Disney stuff. Like
Hmm.
he'll be in Treasure Island shortly after this and stuff too.
Okay,
So
okay.
James Baskett, though Uncle Remus
Basket.
himself, is fantastic in this movie. He is a
He
very
he is.
warm presence throughout the entire film. Like you really do want to hear him tell stories.
Yeah,
Um,
he's friendly.
yeah,
He
he's
feels
got
very trustworthy, and he feels like he genuinely cares for the kids. Like,
yeah,
or I should say, he genuinely cares for people.
yes, yes.
Because everybody kind of relies on him, but I think they
Hmm.
rely on him and they trust him because he's so warm and friendly to everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's this is another one of those things, and that's why I think the biggest problem that this movie has, and I think you'll notice it with this, where because it's Reconstruction, you still have he's still like he's not a slave, but his life is kind of that of a slave.
Hmm.
He's still living on the plantation. They still have like the you know, the hired help that's
Hmm.
also an African American woman. And you know, you have the I don't know what the boy that's there. I don't know what his relation
I'm not.
like.
Yeah, I couldn't tell.
Yeah,
Couldn't
it's
tell.
unclear, but like it's interesting because it's trying not to offend anybody with it, because it's like they don't want to like bring you down with the Civil War stuff and slavery, but they're also whitewashing sort of their
Hmm.
experience
Hmm.
by making it sort of like, and after the war everything was okay. They were getting paid, they were employees, not slaves, and uh just yeah, completely just sort of like bleaching the history of like these people's experience. And I think
It.
that's sort of the biggest problem this movie has.
I agree, and
Like
it.
it's to a frustrating degree. Like it didn't want to
Yes.
commit to anything. Like it almost would have been better if they like were slaves and were being at least like it's showing their experience.
Right.
This is a
Yep.
rare situation where they're being treated with something resembling respect, even if it's not really. They're still slaves. They're not. It's not really respect,
It's
but
this kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
dehumanizing way that they treat the you know everybody on this plantation, because
yeah.
you do have the rich white folk, and the way she
You have the poor family
the
living on the.
exactly.
I don't even know where they live. Like on this,
Who
like
knows.
it's like because it seems like they're close enough to be like on their property, but they're
Hmm.
not.
Hmm.
That's a weird.
Well, the way they treat, like the way Johnny's, I think that was the boy's name, Johnny's mom, is that who
Yeah.
was the mom, when she kind of goes after Uncle Remus and tells him, you
Mm-hmm.
gotta stay away from him, or stop telling him stories.
Yeah.
Um, and you kind of see, in a weird way, you see like that life sort of drain out of
Yeah.
Uncle Remus, and I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, man,
It's
she really treated him like not someone of equal stature in
yeah.
that scene.
It's one of the few instances where it's like she is like the mom is like the racist of the movie, although
Yes,
they
yeah,
can't play her as the racist.
yep,
But she from the jump isn't a big fan of Uncle Remus for kind of no
mm-hmm.
reason at all. But they don't want to go out and out and say that she's a racist because she is the mom,
I
and
think
Disney,
that's the worst part
yeah,
about everything
exactly.
in this film. It just
It's
it's trying
they,
to toe this line and
it's
not step over either side.
yeah, it's trying really hard to be centrist in a
Yeah, yeah,
time where you
yeah.
simply cannot be
You
centrist.
cannot, you
No,
cannot. And I mean,
like
not even in the time. It's just
yeah,
the whole setting of this
hmm,
film, the whole basis of this film. There was no centrism. There's
yeah,
no middle point. I mean, it's
yeah.
either
There's
you are pro or against.
yeah,
You are either a good person or a
yeah,
bad person,
yeah,
and they're like, well, what if
yeah,
these are reforming bad people? And
yeah,
no, they're still bad people, even if they're
yeah.
reforming. You just gotta be what you are. You
Yeah.
gotta they need to
I
show
don't know.
what's actually happening.
Yeah. I don't know what the creative standpoint was to make just like evil children. Like So, like
Oh,
the
the
the the,
Savers,
bull,
is that what their
the
name? The Savers?
yeah
Oh,
the two
Favors,
yeah
Favors.
yes there you go, the two bully kids that are
Oh
going
God, they're
to kill that
horrible.
puppy. Like
They're
that
gonna
is a
drown the puppy.
yeah, and that is the plot point basically of this movie. That
Uh,
dog is the entire this movie is a
hmm.
threadbare plot.
Yeah.
That dog is sort of the biggest plot point, and he gets the dog, and yeah, and they're gonna kill the dog, and
Oh
it's just
gosh.
there's carnage left and right in this
Hmm.
movie. There is no way without ever seeing this movie that you would predict what the final act of this movie is going to be, where he gets almost killed by a bull, and is brought back to life in his hospital bed
God, that was unbelievable.
by a story by Uncle Ray, which is again is another trope, because there is
Hmm.
the movie trope of the there's some blue language that has to happen a little bit, but it's the movie trope of the magical Negro that's in movies, where it's just like that you have those problems of like, well, and now you have this black person that's ultra intelligent and seems to have magical powers, and he saved the day by telling a story to that stuff. And like, why is that the end of this? Why is that the
Right,
end of this
right.
movie? It's again, it's them almost going back on all of the stuff that they were doing throughout the movie, and just like, and then just fall right into the racism trope of like, that's what black people
I
are to
think
movies.
I agree, and I think uh, for me the one of the biggest takeaway of this. I mean, obviously the racist part of it
Mm-hmm.
was a big point in this, and I learned to hate the plantation owning family very quickly, especially the
Yeah,
mom and the stupid favor kids.
yeah,
But what really sort of got to me was whenever I watch any type of movie, I like to think, okay, so what's the point?
yeah.
Where are the climaxes
Mm-hmm.
in any film? Where are the high points? Where are the low points? What's the buildup? And there is, to me, it felt like there was none of that
Yeah.
in this film. There are
Yeah.
great sequences. Obviously, the
Yes.
animation is fantastic.
Yeah.
Even the little stories are,
Mm-hmm.
are really kind of understandable stories, and it's fine. But all this film turns out to be is a sort of anthology, and maybe that's the way they build the film initially. Is it's just a
Yeah.
little collection of
It's
stories.
it's not
That's really
that's
all
not
it
too
is.
far from reality. It was sort of originally sort of built as going to be like short films. That was sort
Sure.
of the initial goal,
Okay.
was just do Remus short films. But it eventually just kind of spun into this
Hmm.
because they needed a movie to release in theaters.
Hmm.
They needed to make good on their contracts, and doing a hybrid, because their contract with RKO was for an animated film, and doing a hybrid with live
Oh,
action animation counted towards an
interesting.
animated film. So it just worked out that way for them. But I feel like if this was done more like The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, where it's sort of presented as stories being read to you,
Yes.
instead
Yeah.
of having this
Yep.
instead of having that story in the background, if you just had Uncle Remus telling these old cultural stories, to
Hmm.
maybe just implying that the people he's talking to are kids, or like, or maybe just having him sit around with a group of kids,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
at this point Disney, I can't remember, it's the same year Disney put out what's called a package feature, because again, they were broke, and they just put out movies that were bundled cartoons in the theaters. And a lot of times, like, one of them was just sort of had this framing device of a birthday party, and this guy was telling stories to the kids. And I guess they couldn't go back to that well again, but I feel like this movie probably would have stood the test of time a little better
Might
if
have
they didn't,
benefited more if it did. Yeah.
if it didn't actually have this tone deaf story of whitewashing, um, you know, you know, black culture, black history. I mean, it really does. It just, like, it treats it like it was just a whoopsie, as opposed to a serious situation. And it's like,
The
everything after the war was fine. Once the 13th Amendment was read off, everything was great.
Everything's great. Yeah, you know what? I think you're onto it in that how they could have structured this, how
Yeah.
they could have structured this film. And again, I do want to. Whenever I look at historical films or historical pieces
Mm-hmm.
of art like this, I always think what was going through their mind when they were putting this together. Because I reckon the majority of the folks that were part of this are probably long gone by now.
Yes.
If not all of them, right? That put this together. So getting those actual answers, who knows? But I would have liked to get into the minds or the mindset, or had a conversation with those with the original planners of this and say, what is the point of
Yeah.
this? Is it just, I mean, I know you guys just need to make a movie, but is there some type of cultural significance? Are you guys actually
Yeah.
trying to do some good? Are you you just not care?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, is of the time, is this the way people just sort of created films of the time? Or and then B or two, I don't know if I was using the letters enough for
Yeah.
this. I would have really sort of been curious as to why they went with this story format as opposed to, like, Fantasia was what, 1940, I think. Fantasia was
Yes.
1940, and that was 8 individual animated pieces,
Mm-hmm.
right? Basically 8 little
Yeah.
short stories brought together. And to this day, people still remember
Oh,
Fantasia, mostly because of the stupid broomstick scene and maybe a
yeah.
couple other. They don't. The majority of folks don't know all 8
Of Fantasia.
of
Yeah.
Fantasia until you sit and you watch it. Like, oh, I remember that. I remember that. I remember that.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, that in a weird way like you're saying, stands the test of time
Yeah.
longer, because you're doing this. You're trying to link something together with the plot, with the story that doesn't do anything good. And the other aspect of that is, these are cultural stories, and
Mm-hmm.
you're relaying them to a white kid, a little
Yeah.
white kid,
Yeah. A
a
little white kid,
plantation
like,
owning white kid. It's like,
yeah.
well, couldn't you have kept it within that,
Yeah.
within that culture group? I mean, I'm gonna assume that, obviously,
Well,
there were still
yeah.
a lot of segregation, still a lot of,
Oh, that's so when this movie made its world premiere, James Baskett wasn't allowed to go
yeah,
because
okay, right, right,
they
yep.
premiered it in Atlanta and the theaters were still segregated. So he wasn't even allowed to go to the premiere of his own movie. Disney
Mm-hmm.
tried,
Mm-hmm.
but it just was never going to work out. Like, I feel like you could have just not gone to Atlanta. I understand
Yeah,
the
yeah,
desire to, because that's sort of like the
the
background of
setting,
this
I
movie,
guess, yeah.
but yeah, but like, yeah, that's the problem so much with this, was like the people involved with working on it mostly had the best of intentions. Walt
Yeah,
definitely had the
yeah.
best of intentions. He there's, historically there's a lot of sort of like what was Walt's sort
Mm-hmm.
of beliefs and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. There's always the anti-Semitism stuff and stuff. But by and large, he certainly wasn't racist.
Mm-hmm.
He definitely had the 40s mindset, a person that was
Sure.
raised in
Yeah.
the 1920s or 40s. Um, you know, but he set out with the best of intentions. Some of the people they brought on for the project probably didn't have the best of intentions. One of the early script writers was definitely like a Southern guy,
Mm-hmm.
who they had to cut out like certain like phrases and stuff that I shan't be repeating. Not the hard ones, but ones that you
Sure, sure,
definitely
sure.
don't want to be saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, which goes in hand with some of the stuff that's in this movie already. But we'll get to that shortly,
Mm-hmm.
because we haven't even talked about the cartoons yet.
No, no.
Because the cartoons, with the exception of the one,
Yeah.
are mostly inoffensive. They don't even really touch on race in any way, shape, or form. Um, but except for the big one.
The big one. The second one.
Yeah. But yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
everyone's intentions were good, and it just sort of, and at the time, package features were big for the studio, so it's kind of weird that they just couldn't figure out a way to make this a package feature.
Mm-hmm.
And it ruined it. It ruined it going forward. And they knew going in, they had people like NAACP was kind of in on it and
Mm.
everything. They had the right people sort of involved, but they didn't really give them all of the access that they should have. So, eventually stories get out about what the movie's about, what's going on. Before it ever came out, it was already having problems with an audience. But it
Sure.
was a huge hit when it came out. It was a massive hit, and it stayed a massive hit for years. Uh, like, it got re-released a couple of times. I think the last time it was re-released in the '80s in theaters. Never made its way to home video for obvious. Like, they've locked it up in the vault. It did in Europe and Asia. Like, I think
Hmm.
Asia has I think you can get a laser disc of this in Japan.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it never made its way to VHS in America. Obviously not DVD or Blu-ray. It's never gonna come to Disney Plus. We had a discussion on the first part of this where we're like, do I want to see it come out? Do I think it
Mm-hmm.
should come out? And or if it did come out, would I buy it or something? And my response is, well, if it came out, I would buy it, just because I'm a history kind of guy, especially when it comes to film in particular, not just Disney, but film in general. I have some real stinker films that are historically important, like Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate, one of the biggest
Oh my
flops in
goodness.
Hollywood history.
Yeah.
It's 3.5 hours long and terrible, and I own it because I'm fascinated by this sort of historical stuff, and so that's what
Morbidly
fascinates me.
fascinated. Sure.
Yeah, yeah. It's like just my relationship with movies, and it's like, so yeah, but no, I don't think it should ever come to Disney Plus. I think that's the right call.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the cartoons, shall
Yeah.
we?
Yeah.
Those are probably the biggest, because those are the ones that sort of stood the test of time.
Yeah.
The cartoon parts,
Yep.
because they'll even separate that stuff out. I will actually show you one thing that I do have represented from this movie, considering I have the vinyl record of
Whoa!
Brer
Look at
Rabbit
that.
and Brer Fox, and it's a storybook too. So when you're
Oh, nice.
so when you go into it, it's actually showing you some of the story stuff, and it's got I think it's got Zippity Doodah as one of the tracks. Yeah, it's got Zippity Doodah, but it also, unfortunately, has the story that's being told on this is the second story.
Oh, yep,
So,
there it is.
So this
Ooh,
came
boy.
out. So this record came out about 10 years after the movie, and this is what they decided to put on it. So that's the biggest pun, slightly intended, sticking point
Oh, goodness.
of this movie and the cartoons itself, and why I think this part makes people more angry than anything else in the movie. Although I think the live action segments are the real reason why it's kind of
Yeah.
like are the real problems of this, because. So I'm gonna say it once, and then we're just gonna refer to it later. It's the tar baby scene.
Yes. Yep.
So from here on out, it's just going to be the baby,
baby.
because I'm not going to keep repeating that. We did that the last episode too, and we're just not going to keep repeating that phrase, because regardless of its history, what it is now is what it is now.
Yeah.
That's how words work. It doesn't matter that it used to mean something else. What it means now is completely different. You can look it up in the dictionary, and still to this day, it explains that it's like a problem,
A problematic situation that makes itself for
a problem solution only exasperated by its solution, and that's like its secondary definition is now like a racist term kind of thing. And there's been plenty of politicians that got in trouble because they're old guys that know that phrase from being about a problem, not about it gets a little funny. But yeah, so the whole second cartoon of this revolves around the bear and fox making a baby out of tar to capture the rabbit, which is
try to trick the rabbit into interacting with it.
Yeah, it's their solution to catching the rabbit is just made worse by creating this difficult
Yes.
So like you can't watch this and not feel weird.
Yes. I felt so. This for me was this was the point where I kind of put my hands up and said, "Whoa!" Because that first cartoon segment,
it's really charming.
It's just for whatever intents purposes, I could see kids.
It's a Bugs Bunny cartoon.
It's a Bugs Bunny cartoon where he's tricking whoever.
Yeah, tricking the bear into.
Tricking the bear to take over his spot. Yeah. And I thought, okay, I've seen that a million times.
Yeah.
And I don't really have much of an issue with that one. But then this segment came on, and like I said, I put my hands up and said, "Wow, this is the point where the entire film really sort of changed for me." Not because of just this segment, just this animation, but the way it's sort of not really addressed. That it's the way it's sort of addressed and talked about in the rest of in the live action portions, and how, and then you get to this actual animated piece and what's happening there, and the visuals they utilize and the aesthetics and everything within it is just, this is a mess of itself. Like it continues, it just compounds itself as a mess.
It's
Just
funny
by
too because
being there within, it's like an
yeah,
inception mess is what it
yeah.
is.
And it's funny too because like the first story ties in with sort of the problems going on at the time for the boy. Um, like part of this second story falls in with sort of the problems, but like the whole baby situation sort of is kind of unnecessary. They didn't need to do it because all they need to do is capture the
Yeah,
rabbit,
yeah.
and I understand that it's the story, that it is the story, but they cut out a different story. There was like another story that was they were
It's
working on to include
it's
in it,
very
like
out of place.
yeah,
It's very out
it's
of compared to the other cartoons.
yeah, it's funny too because like again at the time of making it, not a racist phrase.
Hmm.
It wasn't. They by creating it, they've willed it into existence as a racist
Mm.
phrase because it became sort of public domain at that point. Like it became something that they
Sure.
saw on screen, and you can't sort of. I think the biggest problem is sort of isn't so much the phrase as the characterization of the baby. They really sort of like minstrel showed up the baby a little bit,
Hmm.
made it
Hmm.
look like a stereotype with its
Hmm.
clothes and the way, and it's black with striking white eyes and stuff. Like they really like Al Jolson style, like
Sure.
almost made a blackface joke without doing it. And for a movie that kind of steers away from a lot of the sort of stereotypical like with the like the speech is a little over the top at times. Like it may be vaguely uh historically correct, but I think they overdid it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But like this point in particular, it really feels like this is where they stereotyped up, like where the animators kind of went loose a little bit too much for the baby's design, and it just makes it like, and from today's lenses, it's like how Gone with the Wind had its issues recently and stuff. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
when you come at it from this angle, nowadays it's almost unwatchable.
Right.
It's already not a great scene altogether, but now it's just compounded by modern, like, and by modern I mean like 40 years ago at this point is
Sure. Yeah.
where it became truly the issue, because the phrase, the baby phrase, is uttered in Roots in the 80s,
Hmm.
and it's inaccurate in Roots because no, they would have never have said that in to anybody then because it wasn't a phrase. It wasn't something that somebody would have called a person of color during
Sure.
that time frame.
Sure.
But so by the time Roots was out, it was in American language as a racist term, and
Yep.
that's where it
It
really
became part of the vernacular, I
yeah, it
guess you could
became
say,
part
of
of the
the races.
vernacular, mostly because of this movie at this point, which is a
Hmm.
shame, but also like I guess any reason to keep this movie out of the public view.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and it kind of the story kind of like is the rest of the movie, but like the because it just spins off, like they capture him and then they throw him in the briar patch and then they capture him again,
Hmm.
and that will dovetail into that's what the ride is.
Hmm.
So Splash Mountain is the Song of the South ride. They can never
Hmm.
say that. They never could say that. James Baskett appears nowhere in the ride on purpose. And the funny story about the Splash Mountain ride is that it's called Splash Mountain because I think it was originally called like Zippity Doodah Falls or something like to that
Hmm.
effect. But they got called Splash because they were trying to market and cash in on the movie Splash
Oh,
with Daryl
really?
Hannah. So that's why it's called Splash Mountain. And
Huh.
Michael Eisner tried to get a Daryl Hannah animatronic put into the ride at
Oh,
one
what?
point. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
That's yeah. So that's why. So they just compromised. It's like we'll call it Splash Mountain. We're not putting a mermaid animatronic in this ride.
Hmm.
They already didn't have the budget for it. The rides, 90% of the ride's animatronics are just taken from a previous ride and repurposed into this ride. There was a musical show called America Sings where you would just kind of go around in a theater and all of these animals were singing the celebrations of America, you know. And so they just ended up their way into the ride because they were animals that would fit into. That's why it's like it doesn't make any sense that there are like chickens in this in the briar
Hmm.
patch, but whatever. Here they are. And so yeah, the whole ride is him finding his laughing place, you getting
The laughing place.
the
Yep.
laughing place, uh, the rabbit getting captured, begging not to be thrown into the briar patch, and then the fall in the ride is the rabbit and you being thrown into the briar patch, like in the ride. So this ride is very much the
Mm.
Song of the South and very much the baby scene, with just
Mm-hmm.
with the exception of cutting out the baby entirely.
Yeah. Yeah.
They just capture him and rope him up, which is much more realistic. Like other than what they and it cuts out one of the major problematic cartoon moments because
Mm-hmm.
if that wasn't in there it would be much more palatable these days. You could just
Sure.
watch those cartoons from start to finish and enjoy yourself, but the baby really ruins the whole
That's
experience.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah.
Again, there are definitely many aspects of this that sort of that
Yeah.
are controversial, I
Yeah.
guess. But in entirety, they all sort of add up. But this
Yeah.
is the middle, that video, that middle animated clip, the
Mm-hmm.
baby, it takes this from having a period at the end of the sentence to a giant exclamation point
Yes.
at the end of the
Yes.
sentence, and yeah.
Before that, especially in modern quote unquote
Mm-hmm.
times of, at the earliest, like, or at the latest, like 1982, but earliest is about the time this movie came out. Of like, it would have been subtle, but then
Mm-hmm.
that's just like it's kind of subtle how it's like how it's just sort of like kind of demeaning, sort of like their history. But then it's like, here's this pow right in your
Yeah.
face of this, like, oh geez, okay, this is I see what's going on here now.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, and it just that's the reason why that scene is the reason why the movie has the reputation it has. Although I think the to the people who have seen the movie understand that that's probably the least of the movie's problems.
Sure.
Uh,
Exactly. Exactly. I
Especially
think
if
the
you're
more you watch the film,
yeah.
the more you find things in there that are questionable, and
Yeah.
then as I watched it, it's again, as I watched it, things just kept getting compounded, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say worse and worse and worse, but
When
things
things
became
things
more
add up.
apparent.
Yeah.
Things add up. They
Yeah.
add up. They became more apparent, and the adding up was what, by the end, I thought, I'm ready. There are beautiful animation,
Mm-hmm.
great songs. I'm ready for this movie to be over.
Yeah. It's also not
Yeah,
a good movie. Like
and
that's
that's
sort of the
exactly it.
problem. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like it's a thoughtless sort of
Yes.
take on an American culture altogether. Like you're just sort of demeaning a history of an entire race of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Unintentionally, but by trying to be as nice as possible, you're being somehow worse about it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but but then on top of that, it's just a boring movie.
And I think that, to me, a
Yeah,
bad, boring movie
yeah,
makes bad parts, or makes
yeah,
issues glaring even
yeah.
more,
It
even more
makes
so.
all of
Yeah,
this sort of it makes all of
amplifies
the
them.
unintentional racism stick
Yep.
out and the intentional racism stick out as
Mm-hmm.
well,
Mm-hmm.
all that much more, because it's all you can do is sort of like you're
Yeah.
bored, so you're already just you're focusing on every little stupid thing that's happening in the movie,
Mm-hmm.
and you're
Mm-hmm.
just like by the end of the movie you're still confused, like this is post Civil War. This makes no sense, like any sense,
It,
like
it it's funny. It's post Civil War, but it definitely felt like 1940s America. It's
yeah,
weirdly,
yeah.
this is post Civil War, but the way they kind of
It's it
talk, and it's
Yeah,
yeah.
and you would think this movie would try to do a better job at trying to um, make a point.
Mm-hmm.
Try to, because like you realize that these are tales being that passed down kind of tales for
Mm-hmm.
people of color, and you would think you would try to treat them with as much respect as possible and try to treat them with like care and try to say like, see, like like we need to respect everybody or whatever, and they just don't have any message at all. It's just like, hey, these stories are fun and he's a nice guy, and that's their message. Like the
Yep.
stories themselves have their own little small messages, but none of them apply to a lot of
Mm-hmm.
everyday, like, like the first one, like, play it smart or whatever. It's like
Sure.
reverse psychology can get you a
Use
long
your
way, which
brain instead of your
yeah,
brawn. Yeah.
yeah, which, and a lot of the messages are kind of like not great, to teach kids like reverse psychology, not the
Yeah,
best
a little young to figure that
message.
stuff out.
Yeah, like, and the
You
kid
don't want to give
immediately.
me ice cream. Okay, I'm going to give you ice cream, kiddo.
Yeah, and the kid
Yeah.
like gets away with it early
Oh
on
God,
because
yeah.
he tricks the bullies into telling their mom that they're trying to get the puppy, and so she beats them, which again
Oh,
is
it's
just
insane.
yeah, yeah. The live action part of this is almost unbearable.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
bad, and it's culturally bad, and
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
so you've seen it now. You've seen the
Mm-hmm.
problems. So would you say that it's earned its history? That it's earned
I
its sort of legacy?
yes, I do think it has. I do think it
Yeah.
has, and it now that I've seen it. Will I watch? First of all, will I watch it again? I may watch it again just to kind of go more into the critique side of
Yeah.
watching a film and really kind of look at things from that criticism style standpoint. The first time I watched it, again, I just said I'm just gonna sit here and watch it and see what I think about it. And I couldn't help but wanting to critique stuff, knowing what I know today. Obviously we're talking 80 years after the film
Yeah.
first, it was in theaters, 75 years. But knowing what I know today, I couldn't help but critique it. And partway through, especially after the baby animation, I thought,
Yeah.
well, let me put myself into the mindset of somebody in the 40s. But the thing about that is, even though they were closer to the Civil War and that the Reconstruction era than we are, obviously,
Yeah.
we're 75 years after that.
Yeah.
The method of tackling certain subjects doesn't fit, because they went this humorous route and this sort of
Mm-hmm.
family fuzzy friendly
Mm-hmm.
route, when we know none of that was
No.
happening there. And to me,
No.
that's the biggest fault of this film, is
Exactly.
that it doesn't flat out say they're
didn't-
free. They're free, but these are
Yeah.
still absolutely horrible times for humanity in America.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Free in terminology, not free in reality.
Yeah, it made it seem like everything was immediately fine.
Yeah.
And that's.
But they choose to live on the plantation with us and be happy and
it's just like,
hang out in the
I'm like,
woods.
that is just absolutely utterly disrespectful.
Exactly.
I hate
Exactly.
that message. It has no, like, it could have taken a hard stance on race in general.
But I
race
almost wonder,
should have played a part in this movie.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And I was gonna say, I wonder if just that era, the 1940s, I don't want to say prevented people, but that just wasn't tackled in film, and it obviously couldn't have been tackled well. I don't know I don't know enough of my 30s and 40s film history to really understand what was happening in the era. But my fear is that, because they kind of stuck to their old ways of the stage and the early silver screen stuff, that this was just going to be the result regardless, and they shouldn't even bother trying to tackle this, because they weren't ready for it.
And we're only a couple of years after the end of the World War II.
Yeah,
where propaganda films were huge, and sort of making fun of races was a major part of that, of the storytelling style, and so, like, it's like Disney themselves were doing it in their animated cartoons. There was a lot you can go and find a lot of, like, where they're making fun of the Japanese and stuff in some of the World War II propaganda films. And, like, so that's just the 40s mentality was either be funny racist, or don't address it at all.
You're right, and I think it's probably that again, it's that point you just mentioned about the propaganda. This was a time where, if you were in America, America was right, and so let's make America look great. Even the crappy stuff we did, let's make that look like we immediately did something good, because we have to instill in people that we're a great country, and right now we can do no wrong. I mean, God forbid they put a film out that's divisive around that time, right during World War II. So the mindset was definitely different back then.
Yeah.
But the thing about art is art's effect and art's meaning changes depending on who sees it and when they see it. Because back then it meant one thing. You look at some of Picasso's stuff now and you think, wow, that's that has way more meaning now, or it has way less meaning now,
Yeah.
or things like that. So
Yeah.
that's the magic of art,
Yeah.
good or bad.
That's yeah. And yeah. And that's the sort of whitewashing of history is something that sort of sticks with Walt and sort of the ideal American dream
Mm-hmm.
throughout the entirety of his life. You know,
Right. Yeah.
a lot will tell you that
Yep.
the reason why he got into cartoons was because it was a world that he could create in a world of chaos. It was something that he had complete control over and make it exactly what he wanted it to be.
Yep.
And when he
Yep.
lost that control with the artist strike, where it made it clear that he wasn't in control anymore, is when he starts pivoting towards live action and then the theme parks. And once the theme parks hit, he's able to have complete and total control. Nobody's going to tell him no. And he's able to, again, whitewash history, because the first thing you do when you walk into Disneyland is you walk on Main Street, USA, which is a turn of the century old town America. Completely whitewashed of any sort of strife, turmoil, or anything. It's just this ideal place where everyone lives in harmony. You've got the corner store, you've got the thing. It's like it's the America that he wants and the America that he wanted but never really existed. And he knew
Sure.
that. He
Yeah.
knew that, but
Yeah.
that's what he wanted. And I'm sure part of that is what exists in Song of the South, where that's the America that he wanted, where it wasn't
Yep.
there wasn't strife. Like, it was okay. After the Civil War, everything turned out fine.
Idealism.
So,
Yep.
yeah, so it just ideally, it immediately was fine, even though it was decades of work after the Civil War.
Still going on, to be honest.
Still going on to
going
this day. Like, yeah,
Yep.
like when this movie came out, his star couldn't go to the premiere. Like,
Yeah, that's insane.
And that we're talking, this is 40s. It's, of course. And luckily, he stayed friends with James Baskett for the rest of James Baskett's life. He petitioned and got James Baskett an honorary Academy Award the year that this movie would have been nominated for awards. So James Baskett is an Academy Award winner for this movie. It's like a special one because they weren't, again, African American actor in the 40s, not a pretty common leading role situation in the 40s. That was a big deal too. Like, he's a man of color in a leading role, and a Disney, like, it's a Disney production. That's a
Disney
big production.
film, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we fight for that now in modern Disney.
Yeah.
And that's something that at least they were able to get that done a long time ago.
Yeah, so he was able to fight and get James Baskett an Academy Award. So, good came out of it, and for some people, but like the film will be lost to time. It's going to be a footnote in Disney history. It was a massive success and sort of stayed a massive success for a while, but like it came up in the last discussion, and I was like, do you think there's any scenario that Disney could present this with the correct context? And I just put on Disney Plus or on home video in any way, shape, or form. Is there anything they could do to really provide the appropriate context for this kind of thing?
I actually, in a weird way, I kind of think there is, but more from an educational standpoint. You could say, hey, this is not part of Disney Plus because it's a different sort of aspect of who we are, but
it gets the Milan deal. You have to be Disney plus.
Yes, it's the plus. This is something that we feel is relevant for discourse and for conversation. It's not going to fit the whole theme of the rest of Disney Plus or whatever, but maybe there's some sort, and you get films like this, you get other, there are obviously countless films that they're propaganda films. Yeah. You can put some of those in there and say these are, and you could put commentary over these. You have certain aspects. I think that is potentially the proper way to, or I don't say proper, but is one way to take, get these available again, is to really, you bake in the reason behind why these films are controversial today, and why, why we need to learn from them.
In terms of home video, they kind of lost their window.
Yeah.
Years ago, they used to do Disney Treasures, which was these really high-end deluxe sets for Disney aficionados like myself. And
like yourself, yep.
Yeah, and so a lot of them are simple. A lot of them are the Mickey Mouse Club, like the first week of the Mickey Mouse Club, or all of the Mickey Mouse shorts from the black and white to the color era. All the Goofy cartoons, all the Pluto cartoons, the Disneyland TV show stuff. and they're all presented with historical context, and all of them are hosted by Leonard Maltin, which is very nice.
Wow.
And one of the sets
Oh,
that they
that's
put,
right. Yeah.
yeah, one of the sets that they put out was called "On the Front Lines," and it was all of the World War II propaganda
Okay.
presented. And so, like, when you put the disc in, you have Leonard Maltin sort of like coming up, it's like, "Hey guys, you need to know that this was the '40s. America, we're not like it wasn't good, but this is what was acceptable at the time, and that sucks. But like, so keep in mind when you're seeing sort of these caricatures and sort of like the things that they're saying, like it's like that would have been the window to have put Song of the South on a Disney Treasures set of some sorts, because you would at least it's built into it's priced out of any normal person's feeling, because these were like $60 sets, and they're only like 2 discs, so they weren't cheap by DVD standards even in like 2007, but they were designed for people that would understand the context a little more, and it's nice to be presented with the context, because one of the most famous Disney cartoons of all time outside of the Mickey Mouse is the Three Little Pigs.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
With the "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf" song and all that stuff. That song was a pop culture phenomenon, like #1 hit on the radio. In the original cut of the cartoon, the Big Bad Wolf comes to one of the pigs' houses selling brushes, and he is disguised as a Jewish caricature. Like everything.
I
that you could think
remember.
of.
I totally remember that.
And
Yep.
in subsequent years, they reanimated over it, so he doesn't have that thing. And even on the set, that the Silly Symphony that it's on, the version that's on there is the edited version. What some people would say the censored version, but that's a whole different bag of. But they show you the scene that was edited. It's like, this is what it originally was, and as you can see, this is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Like, and like that would have been a good way to have presented it, but that ship has sailed. There's no way to release this on home video anymore.
Nope.
Period.
Nope.
Absolutely not. There's no enthusiast version that's going to exist for this film. So like, yeah, presenting it as some sort of like educational purpose, like some sort of like from the archives set of like, this is for discourse and discourse only. Here's the history behind it. There's some good books about the production. There's one in particular called "Who's Afraid of Song of the South?" And it's actually a really good book showing the sort of history and fallout of the movie. And if you want some of that stuff that you were talking about, like some of the insight in the production and stuff, it's a really good book to pick up for this movie alone. I highly recommend, if you're going to watch this movie, to read that book. I think it's Jim Korkis is the author. He has a whole series of like Disney history books. So fantastic author with really, really deep Disney knowledge and some good sources and inside sources too. So you really get to some of the fine details of sort of the thought process and what happened before, during, and after its release. It's a few years old, so it's not going to conclude some of this more modern stuff, but what's happened now, which is, they're scrubbing it completely from the record now. Have you ever been to Disney theme park in any way?
Yeah, we went to, long time ago. I was very young, Disney World. So I was probably 9 years old, 10 years old. So I don't remember anything.
Yeah. So like, yeah. So yeah, they're scrubbing Song of the South out of Splash Mountain entirely and rebranding it to be Princess and the Frog themed. And you would agree that's the right call, I would assume.
Yes. Yes.
Like, even though like even though the cartoons are good, what they stand for is sort of, I think it's the right call. It sucks because I love Splash Mountain and I'm gonna miss it a lot, but I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it being gone, to sort of right that wrong finally, because it's like, as an adult knowing what this movie is, and especially as a person of color, again, white guy, I can't like, it's hard to, I recognize the thing, but I also will never have that experience. That life experience, to be able to take like your kid onto this ride knowing what this ride represents, that's got to be weird. So and fixing it to be Song of the South, like, it fits in perfectly with the theming already. So and in Disneyland, they're in New Orleans, so perfect. At Disney World, it's in Frontierland for some reason, and I don't know why. But Disneyland, it's in New Orleans, so it just slides right into the theme already.
Perfectly.
Yeah, so So yeah, it's gone as of in a couple of years. Kind of Song of the South will be
Wiped.
wiped from the slate. I think they've already removed Zippity Doodah from the overhead music that plays like during like queues and like outside speaker systems, like in the mall shopping district and
Hmm.
stuff. So it's yeah, it's gonna be stricken from the record completely, and I would say it's the right move.
Yeah,
Finally, I
I
think
agree.
it's righting the final wrong of the thing, and who knows what the future holds. I mean, 5 years, a lot can happen.
Hmm.
Leadership, like, because Bob Iger made it very, like, Eisner made it very clear that this movie was never going to be released. Iger made it very clear that this movie wasn't going to be released. Iger's effectively gone, but not quite because of the
They brought him
horrific,
back, right, or
yeah, for
something.
the horrific state that
Yeah.
everything is in right now. But who knows? His Bob too. I always forget his last name.
Bob too.
Chapek.
Check.
He he could always make the decision that he wants it
Hmm.
released. It's up to him. It's up to the man in charge,
Hmm.
and I don't think he will, but who knows what the future holds after that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But I feel like it's going to be lost to time finally.
Hmm.
It's going to be what it was to you before I made you watch this movie. Just sort of
It's
the
gonna be.
it's going to be the rumor of Disney's lost movie.
Yeah.
Because there's not very
Yep.
many stuff that of Disney that just doesn't exist.
Star Wars Christmas.
Yeah, Star Wars Christmas and this are kind of and the unedited special editions, like
Yes,
the
if they
unedited
don't, they
Star
don't
Wars.
exist. Yeah.
So like those are the things like Disney doesn't like they put things in the vault, but they don't keep it there. This is one of the things that is being kept there, and it's absolutely the right call.
It's the vault within a vault.
Yeah,
That's for
yeah,
sure.
it's its own
That's
special
for sure.
vault.
It's its own special vault. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah.
Very
Uh,
cool.
Sorry I put you through this movie.
No,
Uh,
I'm glad I watched it. It was the first time ever seeing it, and yeah, I'm actually I'm glad I saw it so I could kind of get the understanding of what it means today.
mhm.
I would say I think that
Yeah. And I
to me,
hope and I,
yeah,
and I hope I gave you some context of like the
yeah,
history
yeah,
behind it. So
yeah.
if you sit down and think about it, or if you ever watch it again, because again, it just sort of exists on the
It
internet
exists. Yeah, it's
for
out there.
free right now.
Hmm.
But if you ever watch it again, just keep some of the stuff in mind of what could have been, uh,
Hmm.
its history, and I don't know.
just
I don't know. It's just
just
it's a lot.
sigh,
It's a
silent it
lot.
out. It is.
Yeah,
It
it's a
is.
lot. Yeah, but yeah, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this one. This is an unprecedented. I was gonna say an unprecedented episode. I guess that's not true because what's unprecedented is another person that's not Nick.
Ah,
Uh,
ha, ha, ha.
it's
Just kidding.
not the first two-part episode though.
Mm.
So we did a two-part for Robin Hood.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Hmm.
yeah, so you're the second two-parter, but you're the first guest. So there you
Awesome.
go.
Well, thank
So,
you. Definitely thank you for having me on. I
yeah,
obviously Disney Plus is getting me back into Disney films, and having a 10-year-old, soon to be
yeah,
11-year-old kid is I get to show her some of the films that I grew up with and
yeah,
get to re-experience,
yeah, and
re-experience
not this
them with
one.
me.
That's great.
And definitely not this one,
Yeah,
that's for sure.
yeah.
In fact, if she watched it, she'd probably be pretty bored of it.
I
So
would think so too. It's not an
mhm.
exciting movie, and
It's not exciting at all.
the animation isn't captivating enough
No.
for a young child. It's captivating enough for an adult who's just sort of like fascinated by what is going on with this
That's
movie.
essentially it.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
as a child, it's like it's not rambunctious enough. I don't
No,
think.
no.
Yeah, but yeah.
Well,
So yeah.
definitely thanks for having me on, though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Also, and also, everyone, thanks again for joining us, and have a magical day.